Hello and welcome to our session. For those of you that are new here, sessions are conversations amongst clinicians. We get to talk about a mental health topic that is typically addressed in therapy sessions with a clinician who specializes in that specific area. And it gives us an opportunity to hear from clinicians how they problem solve, how they process, and also, most importantly, how they help their clients. And so today, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mandy Rourke. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I have a private practice here in Austin, Texas. And I'm also a co-founder of Zessio. I am here with my fellow co-founder, Sapna. So I'll pass the mic off to you, Sapna.
Hi, so like Mandy said, my name is Sapna Srivastav. I am a fellow co-founder of Zesho, registered marriage and family therapy intern and current doctoral candidate. And we are so thrilled to be joined by Dr. Christine Henry. And I'll let you introduce yourself, Christine.
Awesome. So I'm Dr. Christine Henry. I'm a licensed psychologist. My practice is based in Texas, but I'm a PsyPAC certified, so I can see clients in I think 32 states or something that is now. So via telehealth. The name of my practice is Therapy for Pet People. So obviously this is, dealing with pet loss is something that my clients sometimes have to deal with. And I'm very passionate about it. It's something that is not talked about as much, as often not as acknowledged as human loss. So I'm super appreciative to be able to speak more about it today.
Yes, and we're glad that you're here because even as we were just starting to prepare for this session, we were hearing such good ideas of things that you do incorporate with your work with clients. And I mean, I have to say that, you already alluded to it, but pet loss is one of those topics that deserves more attention. And it's something that if you don't have a pet or you're not close with your pet, there can be some
Mhm.
lack of empathy or sympathy around this. And so we're so grateful that you're here so we can kind of hear from you of how you, I'm sure, very delicately and lovingly support your clients. So why do y'all, I mean, kind of opening this up to Dr. Christine and also Sepna
Mhm.
too, why do y'all think this topic is such maybe a challenging one for people?
I think it's really changed over the years. So my dissertation and research was on pet loss, and so probably 2006 I started, maybe 2005, and there were just starting to have pet loss sympathy cards. That wasn't such a thing, but now there's all sorts of, loss of a pet, loss of a cat. There's even the birthday cards from the dog or from the cat, right? So it's like I think we're starting to change our understanding of pets and the relationship that people have with them. It's starting to be more acknowledged, but you're right. There are some people who don't get it, even some therapists that really don't understand it. For me, I was so sad when I went to a grief conference and was talking to people and they pathologized pet loss. Like, well, it's not really about the loss of the pet. It's really more connected to the loss of their human in their life, or you know, just really reading into it. And while, yeah, when you lose a pet, there's something called double mourning where you are grieving the death of the pet and then other losses in your life, but that relationship can be significant and should be honored. So even within our profession, even with grief counselors, right, there are people who still disenfranchise pet loss.
Yeah, and I appreciate you pointing that out because I think it's also just, it's so sad that it's also disenfranchised um, in our community as clinicians. And it just also speaks to like kind of the broader societal
Mhm.
messaging around pet loss specifically. When, I mean, I know personally, like I unfortunately have not had the honor of having a pet in my life that I can call my own. I plan to eventually. But I do know so many people who have, and even their losses have affected me very deeply. And um, it's hard when they're like the relationship that's one of the most closest to you in your daily life. Like every minute. They're by your side oftentimes. And so to me, it's hard to understand how in our field we can continue to disenfranchise that, as you said, or just not honor that, rather, as disenfranchising as another phrase for that. And so in your work with clients who are dealing with pet loss, like, where do you start usually? Like, I mean, I know I'm sure it varies for client to client, but like, what is, one of the first steps you encourage?
Well, like you said, one of the biggest issues is the disenfranchisement, right? And what disenfranchised grief is, grief that's not openly acknowledged or validated by somebody. What's interesting is I met one of the big people in the field that writes on disenfranchised grief. I was so excited to meet them. They have a chapter on pet loss, and I was telling him about the research I was doing, and his response was, I was talking about companion animals. He's like, I'll call them companion animals the moment they start paying rent. And so I was like, oh, the disenfranchised person's disenfranchising my grief. It was so sad, right? But so I think the first thing to do is validate and legitimize that loss as something significant. And as therapists, a lot of us really want clients to know that we are, open to having discussions on diversity. And so we'll have pride flags, we'll have, different racial things just to show we're open about this. And so I say for therapists, if you have a pet, have a picture of you with your pet on your website somewhere. And while if you go to my website, you'll see almost every page has got pets on it, because all the clients I work with are pet people. But, even if that's not the primary client you see, it just shows that it's okay, right? And if you're not doing virtual therapy and you're in person, having a picture of your pet in your office can signal that it's something that's okay. And even intakes, one supervisor said to me, he's like, yeah, we spend all this time asking about their boss and their coworker, but then we don't ask about, do you have any pets or any other, other social support in your life, right? And then if we're asking about death losses, so when I do an intake, I'll say, what death losses have you experienced? And if they say, none, I say, have you ever had a pet that has died? And then sometimes then you get, right, it's, if you don't ask specifically about it, clients aren't going to tell, right? So it's showing that it's okay. You don't have to be embarrassed about this. I can understand, not that we exactly understand, but just that you value the connection people have to their pets.
I think that is really important, because I'm thinking about grad school learning about doing genograms, which are relational family trees and things like that. And there being a little icon for the pets. And, at first glance, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And that just kind of tells me that society does put a little bit of emphasis on just the human connections that we have. But to Stephanie, and your points that you're saying here, I mean, there is some real connection, and they don't say a man's best friend for no reason. I mean, there is a significant amount of safety and just support that is part of your social support. And just because they're not paying rent or talking doesn't mean that they are less in value of what they represent. And so I'm glad that you bring it up, because it does give the client permission to just be open about that. Because, if they were in the space where there was no conversation around it, it's not something that immediately may pop up as being as important as a relationship as it is, really.
Well, and then another activity I'll have clients do is it's kind of along the same lines of flavor as genogram, is write a timeline of significant life events you had, and then when did you get your pet, and what significant life events have they been there for? And I had a toy poodle that I got when I was like 8 or 9. They lived to be 18 years. And they had all these different significant life events of you know, my parents getting divorced, going to graduate school, getting married, all of these things, that pet was with me throughout the whole time, right? And one of my friends said it was like a teddy bear that you had that was never taken away from you. And he died when I was in my 20s, but it was this big transitional object that was with me through everything. So it made sense that when he died, it was really devastating. And then adults, I have clients now who they got their pet before they got married, before they had kids. And so when that pet dies, it's kind of like the end of an era. You know, this time when it was just them and that pet, and that function that pet served is different than if they got a pet, you know, with their, you know, spouse and kids and all of that stuff, right? Is that pet, it was just them and the pet, right?
Mhm.
Just like for me as a child, right? It was me and my dog together, right?
Mhm.
So looking at what is the function of the relationship, and what have you been through with that animal?
Yeah, and that reminds me a lot of what you mentioned earlier about like the double mourning,
Mhm.
because I know quite a few people in my world, in my sphere, that um have lost a loved one, and their pet knew them and was around them,
Mhm.
and so losing their pet was just extra heartbreaking, because it's like that last connection
Connection,
to
yes.
that person too. And so there's just so many ways in which pets symbolize like that significance of
Hmm.
life, of connections. Not, I mean, of course, even just the connection with the pet itself,
Yes,
mm,
but the
but in
relationships
addition
with
to that,
people, yeah.
all the additional connections on top of that as well. And so, um, kind of talking about honoring that. What are ways in which people can honor their pets? I know honoring is such a big part of grief.
Hmm.
Creating a ceremony, rituals,
Hmm.
what have you. So what are some things that usually you suggest, or you see some of your clients doing to kind of engage in that?
Um, I will speak to the rituals thing in a second. I want to go back to what you're saying, what you were said
Yeah.
initially about the connection of that the animal has to a loved one. What's interesting, like parrots and turtles live to be 80 years old, right? And so it's very often that somebody will inherit that animal.
Mm.
And what's interesting, I met someone at a conference was telling me that they inherited their parrot from their mother who died. And evidently, when you train parrots, they sound exactly like their owner. So after the mother died, they had their parrot, and the parrot's like, "What's for dinner? What's for dinner?" But in the mother's voice,
Yeah.
and would say something. It's just the impact of that grief, right? Like
Mhm.
exactly what you're saying. And then when that parrot does die, the impact on that. And it's interesting. I've seen a couple times where someone will have a human loss, and they grieve, but then when the animal dies, for some reason there's permission giving to have even more grief.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly a phenomenon, but like people give themselves permission, or they can only hold it in so long, I think.
Yeah.
Grief, I think it's the one emotion that even if you're like, I'm tough, I don't feel, like, grief is no, you are gonna feel this, and you're gonna acknowledge that.
Yeah.
So
Well, and to
yeah.
speak to that before we get to the rituals piece as well, is um I wonder if it's like the additional loss of the coping support that you
True.
had
Mhm.
through going through that grief, through that connection to that person as well. And so it's, that much doubly felt of like you're losing your best friend and your support, and feeling
Mhm.
the grief of the people that they knew too, that they were an additional connection to. And so very, very understandable.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so many people use their animals to help regulate emotions, right?
Mhm.
Petting an animal reduces blood pressure, even just 10 minutes. and having the animal sitting on you like a weighted blanket is self-soothing. If you're alone, talking to the animal can help. Like exactly what you said, all these coping strategies, and then the relationship is gone. Yeah.
Well, maybe this is still a little bit before rituals and honoring, but I am curious of how you support clients that they have their pets that are struggling, and their quality of life as they've gotten older is changing. And that is a stranger element in this relationship, because these animals can't advocate for themselves. It is on, like, the onus is on the puppy parent to make that choice. And I'm just really curious on how you have conversations around that, or any kind of tips that you share around making those decisions that are
So
heavy.
I think they're yeah, it's hard because they can't tell you how they're feeling and you have to assume it. But I think maybe even in cases like of dementia or something, Alzheimer's, different other progressive illnesses, sometimes humans can't tell you what they need or what's wrong with them too. So there's pieces that are similar in that way. But yeah, I think that's what a lot of pet parents struggle with is how will I know? How do I take care of them? I've got a Dr. Mary Gardner. Hopefully, I don't know if you can see. Is it reversed though?
Yeah, it's great.
It's
Okay, great. Dr. Mary Gardner. She has a book. There's one for dogs and one for cats. So if you have like birds or rabbits, I'm sorry, but we can extrapolate. But she has different, I'm trying to find worksheets for people to keep track of. Like, let's see. Oh, sorry.
Oh, perfect.
Different
like pen
things.
to paper.
Yeah, different things to log, to keep track of what medications are working, what foods, keeping track of foods, keeping track of medications that they've tried. If this sort of structured thing would help, right, to help you look at, okay, just because like in vet care and in medical care, sometimes we have to advocate for ourselves, right? And I tell clients, if you go to a vet and you don't feel that they heard your concerns, I've had a lot of clients who had elderly dogs or cats, and they go to a vet and they're like, oh, it's, just time to euthanize them. And, the pet owner feels like they have quality of life, it's just like, that they're incontinent or something like that. And they're willing to put in the effort. So to get a second opinion, right? And to go, ask around to people who is a compassionate vet. I love my vet, and that she's like, here are your options, and gives you very straight, like, on looking at the quality of their life. In this book, she has quality of life measures, and I have attached them to my website. So if you go to therapyforpetpeople.com, under resources, there's a pet loss one. And there's a quality of life measure for dogs, a quality of life measure for cats. And it takes you through basic questions and helps you quantify it, of like, are they able to breathe? Are they struggling to breathe? Are they sleeping through the night? Do they get up multiple times at night? Are they able to walk? Are they eating? Do you have to be force fed? Just really breaks it down. And then at the end, it gives you a score as far as, yeah, their quality of life, is deteriorating, but consult with your vet. And then quality of life is deteriorating. Looks like you need to do more, veterinary care to improve quality of life. And then it goes time to consider hospice or other palliative care. And then the other one, it's like your dog or cat is I don't think they say suffering, but basically it's like their quality of life is really poor. It would be advisable to think about euthanasia. So I've filled those out with clients in session. I've suggested clients have their partner, roommate, friend, or whatever also fill it out, because sometimes they might think the quality of life is better than it actually is. And like with one client, we filled it out multiple times and we're seeing the change. Okay, you know, they were doing this, but now they're not, let's say, playing, right? That's one thing. It's the dog loves car rides and would put their head up and then just lay down the whole time, when they loved car rides or they love playing ball, and they're not doing that anymore, to show that things have kind of changed. There's also a cognitive measure too, and just looking at dementia, right? Because this is what's hard, is you can have a very fit dog, you know, let's say the blood work and everything comes back great. We have one like that cognitively, like Pumpkin will just stand staring at the wall, you know, and then occasionally she'll just start howling and there's nothing, right? She's just howling. Sometimes they get confused in the middle of the night and they wake up multiple times a night. So it can be hard when, you know, physically they're doing well, but cognitively they're not. And then lastly, there's also sort of a quality life measure for the pet owner. And I think a lot of owners are like, I'll do everything, I don't care. You know, I have a client who's sleeping on an air mattress on the floor with their dog, because the dog is incontinent and is very restless, and, you know, is waking up their husband. And so doing everything for the pet, which is sweet, but how much is this impacting her care, right? Caring for herself. And right now she's doing well, but it's something to look at, that if you're not getting any sleep at night, and if the animal is incontinent, you know, but also is soiling themselves multiple times a day, and then you have to give them baths because they're in a diaper and it gets all over themselves, and giving them a bath is, you know, the dog's trying to bite you or whatever, and then that's a struggle. And then insulin, you know, it's just looking at the impact on the human too. And so that's where you have to weigh decisions with all of those variables, which is really hard.
That's really helpful to know that those measures exist, and that, I mean, I can imagine will be super helpful, especially knowing it can be so hard to kind of understand what, you know, the animal is going through, and then, you know, being so focused on often trying to care for them as best you can without maybe necessarily always knowing their needs, and so it's so easy to kind of let your own care drop off. And so I was also thinking about, as you were saying that, like, you know, we're talking about grief around pet loss, but there's also that disenfranchised grief that comes up as a pet is approaching you know, the end of their life, or they're deteriorating. And so as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about the grief that's starting in that phase as well, for those who get to experience that with their pet.
The anticipatory loss, and that's what kind of fueled me to take this up for my dissertation and research. Is so my dog that I spoke about, that I had since childhood, was dying when I was in grad school, and the professor's like, why don't you just get another dog? You know, and like he did have, like, he was still playing, he still knew I was, he wasn't in pain, but his kidneys were failing, and so he was in a little diaper and it was fine. But people's opinion, like, just why are you doing that? And so that's what kind of fueled me to advocate for other pet people. In fact, what's funny is, for my dissertation, they told me, oh, you need 150 participants for what you're doing, you're not going to get it. And I did collect the data online, and 1 week I had 7,500 responses from pet people.
Oh my gosh.
And it was the most validating thing to show that particular professor. And I had a qualitative piece where it's like, is there anything you want the researcher to know? And people said, thank you for doing this. I didn't know it was okay to grieve this loss until I saw this study. And thank you for hearing me and my sadness. And just validating that was so meaningful for people.
Well, it's such impactful work. And I'm glad that you followed your own instinct there too, of being like, hey, if
Yeah,
someone lost a friend, you wouldn't be like, just go get another friend. That's
yes,
absurd type of reaction there with someone's
exactly.
grief. The
Right.
definition of invalidating. So to be able to even offer such a validating experience with space to say, tell me about your
Mhm.
experience with losing your, I mean, someone who feels like they are definitely part of the family.
Mhm.
So maybe now would be a good time to kind of think through, or for you to share some of the things that you do help once they have lost one of their pets. Like, what do you do, or
Well,
what kind of?
I think to back up a second, so we're talking about quality of life and euthanasia, and that
Mhm,
there's also hospice care that most people don't realize it's an option, that they think it's basically euthanasia or not.
mhm,
And that, to check with your vet to see if they offer hospice care. If they don't, there's other organizations that do offer hospice care. And with the euthanasia, it can be done, it can be done in the vet's office, but some vets also will go to your home and do it at your home. So then you can have privacy, not worry about driving to and from somewhere. Your pet can be in their bed in their home and not have to have the stress of going to the vet. There's an organization called Laps of Love and Blue Pearl. Both of those, you can do a search in your zip code to find somebody. So if your vet doesn't offer it, do that. And then with hospice care, it's just like with elderly folks, right? It's just making them comfortable. And so, it because for some people, their religious beliefs are not okay with euthanasia, and so that there are still things you can do to help your animal feel more comfortable. And so I think that's a lot of the therapy work, is helping people make these decisions and then plan it out, and what's going to happen. And so usually when you go, well, also, sorry, there's so many things to talk about,
mhm.
but
Oh yeah.
whether or not to allow children to come to the euthanization, right? The death of a pet is usually the first time kids experience a death loss. So it leaves room for all, if you're open to it as a parent, opportunity for discussion as a family. What are your beliefs about what happens after you die? And to start having those conversations then. And just like a lot of adults sometimes don't want children to go to funerals, sometimes that's not always the best thing. I think it's letting the child decide. And then if you do decide, to let them know exactly what's going to happen. And even explaining euthanasia to children, to the way that we've talked about it, is like, the vet helped them die, that they were really suffering, and the vet helped them have peace to not be hurting anymore. So talk about it in that way. Do not use the words put to sleep, because for children, then that can start creating sleep problems, or all of a sudden the dog is gone and they're off at a farm or some horrible thing. Like, to not do that. Um, and then with the euthanasia, to kind of, the vets usually talk you through it as far as what's going to happen, that you'll go there and they give them a first injection, which will sedate the animal, and they'll fall asleep. Sometimes if the animal's health is in really bad shape, they sometimes die there, that there's nothing else. It's like their body is just so exhausted, right? And then for those that don't, then they come in and they give them another injection that stops their heart. And then for some, again, they just stop breathing, and then the vet will listen to verify that they did die, and to let people know, right, that on some occasions that they can cry or something like that, and to know, that's it's just body reactions, and just to be prepared for it. And then sometimes they'll pee on themselves or they'll poop or something like that, and usually the vet has towels there just to make sure everything's okay. And then a good vet will let that person sit with the animal for however long that they need. What's interesting is, in humans, right, when people used to die, it would be normal that the dead body would be in the house for a long period of time. And now we see that as morbid, but that's just the way it was. And it actually can help for some people with grieving, is to sit. I've had, clients with human loss that have sat at the funeral home for hours and just sat with them and had conversations with their loved one, and until they're ready to walk away or to let go, right? Even with infant loss, right? People think it's so morbid, these people having pictures with their child's dead body, but that's the only image that they have of them. And that for a lot of people, it does help with grief to sit there with the baby and cry, take pictures, whatever, have memories. So to allow that person to sit and cry and hug and talk to that animal for as long as that they need, right? Bad experiences are when vets are like, come on, we need the room. That's horrible. Yeah.
And it sounds like that's
Insensitive.
where, yeah, having a compassionate vet really plays a big role, being intentional about planning for that if you can. And so it's sounding like for those who do end up having to go through euthanasia with their pet, kind of part of your work with them therapeutically is helping them to kind of understand the process, especially if they haven't been through it before. And even if they have, like reminding them, like, this is what you'll encounter. So I would imagine to kind of help lessen the shock a little bit. And then also kind of preparing them for being able to allow themselves that space and time for being able to grieve and have conversations, be in their presence if they can be. Are there other things as well that you usually do to kind of prepare people for the instances that they can prepare for pet loss?
And then also with the euthanasia, after the death, is what do they want to do with the body? And again, this is interesting. Some people, they don't know, right? Depending on where you live, right? There's some states that regulate you can't bury an animal on your property. Some people do that anyway, but just like, to think out, like, are you going to move from this home, right? But if you get it cremated, what's interesting, again, people don't know, is some vets, they do a mass cremation versus you pay extra to have an individual cremation. And I think it's like maybe $500, again, I'm sure it really varies where in the US you are, to be assured, like, you're getting your pet's ashes. And just like with humans, you can get necklaces, rings, different things made, so you can kind of have that pet with you. I'll share with our vet. So one of our dogs that died, they take a little paw print. And so this is his little paw print. Sometimes they do nose prints. They'll take clippings from their hair as well that you can get in a locket or something just to have. And then this is our dog Mongo, who died maybe 3 years ago. And so we have his collar here, and then this is nice little urn that it comes with. It's all engraved and everything like this. So we have him, if you could see in the back, there's like a pile of of urns in the back there. All of our little babies that are there. Because it's interesting is, again, it's state dependent. So we inherited my grandmother's dog, and my grandmother had died. And when she died, we wanted to put her with my grandmother. And so I think my aunt just dug a hole in there and put some ashes there. But some places it's illegal to do that. But I have a client who's a funeral director, and they said they get requests all the time to have their loved one have their dog's ashes buried with them too. But it's like if you want to put an object in there, we can't say anything, but don't tell me it's your dog's ashes. I don't know why legally it is. And I think there are also some spiritual reasons for it. Different religions have different beliefs as far as animals, and to be buried close to an animal can be considered dirty or something like that. And so you'll see here's a human cemetery right next to a pet cemetery. But I think there are some states and places where you can have be buried with your pet or next to your pet. But so this is something different than human loss, right?
Yeah.
That you know, your pet may or may not be able to be buried with you, or you know, or even having a place, right, to go visit, or like that. There are actually virtual pet cemeteries. So if you know you have an urn, but you want to have a obituary placed or something like that, you can do that. There's the Association for Pet Loss and Bereavement. It's aplb.org. They have virtual pet cemeteries and obituaries that you can post there.
Wow.
But yeah, sorry, that was a side tangent. I can't even remember your original question that you asked.
It is so helpful to hear all of the side tangents, because I think there's so much rich, just helpful perspectives and resources. And I think one thing that's really a big takeaway for me is just this ability. I think what you're doing within your work with clients is helping them zoom out and try to be as objective in a time when it's really emotionally taxing. I mean, we're dealing with the heaviness of grief, and what a testament of, you know, people wanting to be buried next to their pets because of such a profound relationship that they have. At this point, I'm wondering, what have we not talked about when it comes to pet grief as we're kind of or pet loss as we're kind of wrapping up here?
I guess I could say a little bit just more about the religion piece. That's something that can also be different, right? Different Christian denominations, you know, don't believe that animals have souls, and so they say they don't go to heaven, and so that can complicate grief as well. And so it's interesting to see how some people tease that apart. I've seen one children's book. It was from a Catholic perspective, and they said there's like a heaven, but it's a human heaven and a pet heaven, and there's a door in between. And during the day they can go to visit each other, but then at the night they have to go back. You know, so it's just interesting to watch, but just to talk with people and help them figure out how that impacts things. I recommend a lot of children's books. There's tons of pet loss books for kids, well, adults too. So here's one. It's For Every Cat an Angel, and there's one for dogs as well. And then there's Pet Heaven, which has got like different, it's a very like childlike pictures. Right? There. And even I recommend these books to adults to read too. And then there's other ones that aren't religious based. This book actually was read to me when I was in elementary school. And it was the moment I realized, oh my gosh, my dog is going to die one day. And it was just so, oh my gosh. But it just talks about dogs getting older, and like this picture is so cute. Let's see if you can see it. I'm having a hard time. Can't go up the stairs anymore, and so having to carry up the dog, and so it's just really a sweet, right, validating thing for people to read. So I recommend that. What you said, like with rituals, if they, you know, are burying and they're not cremating and not going to have an urn, but to create something. So this is one that I made or got together for my childhood dog. It's just a little angel, and then here's his little collar. And so this just kind of sits on my shelf with a picture of him. I've had clients donate dog food or cat food or whatever food to an animal shelter on their pet's, you know, the pet that died's birthday or the anniversary of their death, something to make meaning or to remember them. I've had more people go to like pet funeral homes and like have a celebration of life like we do with people. So that's been interesting and super cool to see that people are getting more support than they used to get.
Yeah, that's even an option is huge, and kind of comes full circle to what you said at the beginning of our conversation of like how much just this topic and this area of our lives has evolved as far as supports and acknowledgement goes, societally as well.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for all these rich resources. And
let me, before we go, I want to give one more last thing though about when to get another pet.
Oh, good call.
I see this and it's a little pet peeve of mine, but people just want to go. Sometimes they don't want to sit with their grief, and so they go run out. I've had people get the same breed, the same everything, and that's not helpful for grief, right? If you're doing it for kids, what is this teaching them, right? That we're replaceable, and that it's not okay to feel and to grieve. And then it actually does have an effect on their relationship with the dog. So let's say you have had an elderly dog who is just a cuddle buddy and sits on the couch, and then you get this new puppy who's so demanding, and chewing up everything and all this, and you're like, you're not so-and-so, like, and that affects the relationship, and then you miss the one that's not there too. But it's okay for people to feel sad. It's okay for people to grieve. So to just not rush to go out and get a new pet. So
would you say that there's a certain point or certain sign that people can really know, like, okay, this might be time when we might be ready as a family or as an individual,
I think
to get another pet?
I think it varies, just like you talked about the anticipatory mourning. Is sometimes they're cognitively gone for so long, and and so they might be more emotionally ready compared to other people. So I think it's very much an individual decision, right? But just to be mindful, am I doing this to avoid my grief? Am I doing this to not feel the pain, to feel the loss? If so, I don't necessarily think that's the best time, right?
I think that kind of brings this full circle for me too, of maybe there has been that feedback from people where it's like, oh, you just lost your animal, go get another one. And so it's been so heavily reinforced that they're like, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm not supposed to allow space for this grief process. So I'm grateful for
in human grief too, right? It's like
right.
In the US, we're so uncomfortable with people feeling grief and loss. And so you're right. I think it's I can't see you grieving because it'll make me feel too. So let's stop that right now, and go get a new pet.
But I'm glad that you bring it up in that way too, because I mean, even as a therapist and helping support, it helps me know how to support my clients too, because it is one of those questions, when is the right time? And I think it's more so not when's the right time, but when do you feel like you've allowed enough space for your grief to, and just also space to create some of those rituals and finding ways to honor and make meaning of the loss too, which, we as therapists, as time has gone on, we're learning that those stages of grief are not really that sequential. You can bounce all the way around, and it can take a while to get to like, what did this animal and this pet mean to me in my life? And how do I open up space again for another person to be part of my family or person? It feels like one pet to be part of my family.
And those stages of grief were developed for people who are dying. It's not for people who are grieving, right? And so I think a lot of lay people throw those stages around, but that's not how grief works exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I mean, again, I can't thank you enough for just this topic. As we were talking, I was thinking about how helpful even just listening to this will be for some people, because we might be able to have you back to maybe talk about and more length of people who don't get to prepare for the loss of their pet. And so right. And so, but I'm hoping that even this conversation, this session today, can be a way for helping them to be like, okay, you know, God forbid this, you know, something does happen. These are the things to kind of prepare for. And so I think it can be meaningful for so many people. And so thank you also for the amazing resources. If we can, we'll try and make a list somewhere of all of them. But it's just been such a pleasure to be able to talk with you about this really hard topic, but very, very meaningful for so many people too. That's just not acknowledged as fully as it should be. So thank you so much for joining us for this.
No problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being able to speak on this.
Absolutely. Well, we are so grateful for our time, and for people to find you just one more time, the website is www.therapyforpetpeople.com.
.com.
Awesome.
That's it.
Great.
Super easy to remember.
Well, thank you so much. We'll look forward to our next
you.
session with you. Thank you.
Yay. Thanks.
Bye.